My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door. It's good to have all of you with us here today for what I promise you, no matter what else is going on in the world today, it's going to be a fun edition of DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. We're going to have John Stinchcomb coming up here in just a few minutes. We're going to get... My monitor in the studio was not on, so I was killing time so I could see myself to make sure I know that you all can see me. But nonetheless, we're going to have John Stinchcomb coming up. A lot to get into with John. There's obviously some weird news out there. Apart from everything going on with the virus, there's some weird news going on seemingly around UGA as well. We'll cover that with John on today's show. I'm going to start with something happy, though. I thought it was really amazing how much something that Kirby Smart said about George Pickens last week completely echoed what a former UGA player said about Pickens on our show just a couple of days ago. Side by side, these quotes are very, very similar, and I think it gives us a real indication about who Pickens is as a player, and maybe more importantly, why people like me are just so steadfast in our hope that we get to see some version of a college football season this fall. So we'll start with something fun on that note, and then we'll deal with everything else that has to be touched on. It's good to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, so obviously there's some coronavirus stuff we're going to have to cover and get to in a moment. Here's the thing. I kind of decided this over the weekend. Like, my anger about some of the way in which this is being covered is growing. My concern about whether or not the SEC will do what I assumed that it would and plow through and have a season, trusting its ability to manage all of this. I'm not quite as confident in that as I once was. And yet, I think we have a job here on this show to kind of try to steer clear of some of that negativity as much as we possibly can. So I am going to keep a good thought. I am going to keep an overall sense of optimism. And we're going to talk about some other things in addition to that, because at a certain point in time, you can't just get swallowed whole by all of that. I'll deal with some of the stuff that Greg Sankey said over the weekend. I won't get into all the stuff I didn't like about what Sankey said, because there was plenty I thought was beneath him that he said over the weekend when he made the appearance on the SEC Network and the ESPN radio program. But nonetheless, we'll kind of get into some of that coming up a little bit later on. Obviously, there's also the weirdness out there involving a UGA freshman offensive lineman, Broderick Jones. We'll talk to John Stinchcomb about that a little bit before we're done here today as well. So we're going to cover a lot of bases. Let me begin, though, with something totally happy and totally fun. And I was talking to my buddy Connor Ollie before the show began, and I think the overall attitude that I have is, and listen, I have not made any bones about this fact. You know, I'm not medical guy. I'm not, a data science guy. I'm not trying to pretend to be any of those people. I have opinions, just like all of you do about all this kind of stuff. I also have enough respect for you to leave my opinions on that subject mostly out of this show for the most part. I hope you appreciate that about what we do here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. But one of the things I was saying to Connor before the show began is, I think there are some Georgia players that it's going to be a real shame if somehow something were to happen that the season were not to take place, just to use the most dire possible outcome on all of this, or if it would be delayed or, greatly reduced or whatever else. You know all the potential outcomes that are there. If that were to happen, there are some Georgia players for whom that would just be such a shame, because you get the sense that they have really been putting in the work, putting in the effort to make this a great year for themselves individually. And why would you not want to do that? You have a chance to, make millions of dollars and change your family's fortunes in more ways than one forever. It's generational, life-changing wealth you have a chance to amass for yourself by the way that you play here at a place like UGA. Why would you not be motivated to do that for yourself individually? And as enough guys try to do that individually, it also speaks to a collective opportunity for the team itself to have greater success otherwise would have had. So let me focus in on one of those guys just for a moment, if for no other reason than this is just a fun thing to talk about, and we probably need just a little bit of fun to have right now. Let's talk about Georgia wide receiver George Pickens, admittedly a pretty popular topic on this show on almost any day. And here's what we're going to build towards here. So if you lose, if you get busy and you kind of, miss some of this, the point I'm about to make is there is something that Georgia coach Kirby Smart said about Pickens a few days ago that is almost eerily similar, like very, very similar to something that a former Georgia wide receiver said about Pickens when he came on our program a few days prior to that. And I think if you've got guy who knows Pickens as well as anyone does, Kirby Smart saying this, guy who's observed Pickens behind the scene, and if he draws essentially the same conclusion, then I think that says something pretty fun all the way around when it comes to the Georgia wide receiver stepping into his sophomore year. Let me begin with Georgia coach Kirby Smart. On the ESPN podcast last week, being interviewed by David Pollack, the subject of George Pickens came up. Kirby gets very specific as to what Pickens has been doing during the offseason, but I also want you to hear this, the general way in which Smart describes Pickens' demeanor. I do think this is important. Here is Kirby on Pickens.
This kid loves ball. I mean, he's as natural a catcher as I've ever seen. Just great hands. I mean, some of the catches he's made in practice are just off the charts, and I get to see it every day. He loves football. I mean, he loves football to the point where sometimes it hurts him. I mean, he's just so energetic after a catch. He just wants to be excited, and he wants to celebrate with his other players, and that's just George. He's young, and he's maturing. He's physically developed more. That's probably the biggest difference in him, meaning adding 5 to 7 pounds, a little faster. He's not a high school freshman anymore. A college freshman anymore. He's stronger. And so I've been really impressed with the changes in his body. And again, we didn't get to see him go out there in the spring, but this guy showed us what he could do last year, and we're going to have to do a really good job putting him in different spots so people can't figure him out. And we better get some help. You got to have a little help for him because there's things you can do to dictate coverage for one guy. So if you can get that second guy and with the backs we got, it makes me feel much better.
So listen, there is just so much to unpack from that, whether it be the thing that Smart says there at the end of, hey, we got to make sure we're creative about putting him in different spots and then letting someone else also grow as receiver next to Pickens and maybe grow as receiver, because of George Pickens. If you'll remember, we addressed that very point on our show a few weeks ago. I made the comparison between, like, say, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, that if George Pickens is your Michael Jordan wide receiver, it's obviously high praise, but you get where I'm going with this, that if Pickens is your Jordan, you've got to have that Scottie Pippen receiver emerge, the kind of guy that has a great year because of all the attention that George Pickens gets. It's interesting to hear Kirby Smart talk about that. Also, the creative way in which they're going to line up Pickens, where they put him on the field, because if you and I all know how good Pickens is, it's obviously that opposing defenses potentially notice all of that too. So, how creative Georgia is to counterbalance the creativity the defenses are going to employ to try to stop Pickens, that's going to really matter. The other thing that the news community is going to notice about all of this is the fact that Kirby talks about a body change for Pickens, adding some, muscle and getting stronger, but Kirby says also getting faster through all this as well, a body transformation. We know that physical transformations are a big part of that first year on campus at a place like Georgia. Let's face it. High school kids, even those that are serious about their athleticism, they're still eating honey buns and things like that all the time, just to use a for instance. You get them on the college campus where the meals are specifically designed for them, and the nutrition is specifically created to get the maximum potential out of these very impressive bodies. Then obviously explosive growth in that first year happens. It sounds like for Pickens, over the course of that year plus that he's been on campus, some of that has taken place. However, the other part that I think is so important here, and this is the part that I want to spend the rest of our time on this topic discussing, is what Smart says at the very beginning of that topic. Oh, man, he just loves ball. He loves ball so much that it sometimes hurts. And we've all seen the examples of that competitive fire that burns in Pickens kind of spilling out on the edges a little bit. But that doesn't come out of him unless that's what was inside of him. That love of competition, that love of ball, to use Smart's phrase, that just desire to play the game, right? There's no one who'd rather be playing football more so than George Pickens, and he plays it all the time. In fact, when we had Sean Bailey, who himself was a former elite recruit at the receiver position at Georgia, had a massive performance in the SEC championship game in 2005, this is a guy that knows the situation with George Pickens, or at least knows what it feels like to be Pickens. And when Sean was with us a couple of weeks ago, he said, listen, I've had a behind-the-scenes look at all of this. I have seen practice myself. And let me tell you what I've seen from Pickens when the media's not there, when the fans are not there, when, CBS, ESPN, the TV people aren't there, when it's just football players playing football. Let me tell you what I've noticed about George Pickens, and it is very similar to some of the stuff that Smart just said. Listen for yourself right here.
When I see George, I see a prototypical receiver. to have the athletic ability that he has, the size that he is. And probably the biggest thing that stands out to me about him is that he truly loves football. He loves to compete. I've had the pleasure to go watch, several practices. And there's a lot of elite guys that are able to turn it on and turn it off. But when you have a guy that has turned on all the time, like George does, practice, he loves to compete. He was extremely vocal, and this is as a freshman. He's extremely vocal. He's in it. He's competing every down. Not even when it's just in the pass game, when it's in the run game, and his job is to block and be aggressive. He's going, 100 miles per hour, and you don't see that a lot at this position. It's a prima donna position. You got a lot of athletes that like to catch balls, like to score touchdowns, but they don't like to get their hands dirty. And George, he will go get his hands dirty in a heartbeat, and he gets excited and is thrilled to do it. So that's probably the biggest thing that I like to see from his game is he loves to compete. He's in it in practice, and he's aggressive even when he's not getting the ball.
So quick backstory here for a moment. I mentioned my buddy Connor Riley earlier. Connor is also our videographer, or I guess video photographer, they like to be called, on the sideline during Georgia games. And you're getting some of the action after the plays, and sometimes Connor would video George Pickens, and what Sean Bailey describes there, a guy that was really physical and likes to block. We would collect video over the course of the year that would certainly show how much Pickens likes to block, and unfortunately, some of that liking to block would extend well beyond the end of the play. In some cases, we never released that video because we're not snitches. But, there's clearly, a level of physicality that Pickens does enjoy playing the game with. And I tell you, we're really lucky here on our program to have a guy like Sean Bailey who has seen behind the scenes at practice and say, oh, my gosh, this is a guy that just wants to play the game at, full speed all the time, even during practice. I've seen that with my own eyes. And to have Kirby Smart confirm that on an ESPN show about a week or so ago, I think is really good, too. And before I go too long on this topic, let me just sort of wrap it up this way. For those of us who've made no bones about the fact we want to be there to be a season, we want Georgia playing games this fall. It's guys like George Pickens that are part of the reason we want that. Because when you're working that hard to transform your body, and when you're going out there and playing at full speed, at full tilt all the time, when all you want to do is play ball, we think those guys deserve a chance to play ball. It's the old Bad News Bears line, let them play, let them play, let them play. That's kind of the way that we feel around here. We're not going to apologize, for that. If there's a way to do it, we want that way to be found. But more than anything, we wanted to start with something fun. George Pickens is clearly that. Former players who've seen him at practice, Kirby Smart, who's got the job of coaching him up, they're both saying the same thing. This is a guy whose competitive fire causes him to love the sport. And the love that Pickens has for the sport is one of the main reasons that so many Georgia fans also love him. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It's good to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube. Also coming soon again on Twitter. We're on Twitter today. Coming soon again on Twitter, Radio Noon, after Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Good to have you with us here today. Big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. They can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. That's a really important thing that matters when it comes to the curb appeal of your home. They can increase the resale value. When it comes to the air conditioning units that are running overdrive right now, keeping that energy inside your house, that's all really important. You can also schedule your free in-home or virtual consultation today with Pella's award-winning team. They're going to take care of everything. Measurement, a free, no-pressure consultation, the advice you need about all the installation options from someone at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. You need that. They're a family-operated branch right here in Georgia, but you've also got the resources that kind of go with a national company there as well. And through July 15th, really good savings here, 10% off your entire project, or no money down, no payments, no interest for 12 months. So a couple different ways for you to get in touch. On the web, it's PellaBranch.com. That website, once again, is PellaBranch.com, or give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. So we got the good, happy stuff out of the way. Let me at least spend a couple of minutes here on the not so happy. Now, if you remember on Friday's show, I said that Sports Illustrated was reporting that the SEC athletic directors were going to have a meeting on Monday. My understanding is that meeting is still slated to take place in person in Birmingham here today. And what I said on Friday's show is, if there was no leaks coming out of this meeting, I was going to take that as good news, because that to me indicated the SEC was head down looking to try to find a way to get this season taking place. And if there were leaks, that might not be such good news. It's a potential harbinger of more bad news to come later on. Now, that's total speculation on my part, and frankly, if you want to disregard all of it, you are certainly free to do that. But if what I'm saying has even a glimmer of truth to it, then it's probably not great that as a precursor to that meeting, Greg Sankey went on the Marty and McGee show on both the SEC Network and ESPN Radio over the weekend, and kind of struck a little bit of a dire tone about his current feeling about the upcoming season. He was asked, how concerned are you? And this is what the SEC commissioner said.
High to very high. I look at the numbers every day, and the important issue is not just numbers, it is trying to understand and comprehend, and that's where literally you want experts moving you away from the scroll or the titles at the bottom of the TV screen or the interviews of this expert or that, find people. And we put a medical advisory group together in early April with the question of what do we have to do to get back to activity? And they've been a big part of the conversation. But the direct reality is not good.
So listen, I said at the beginning of our show, I absolutely hated some of the things that Sankey had to say on Saturday, but the last thing the world needs is more coronavirus opinions polluting the air, so I have enough respect for you to leave that out of this show. But the key takeaway here is, ahead of a meeting on Monday that's probably pretty important, Greg Sankey certainly laying down the hammer in terms of where he views the situation right now. What does all of this mean? I think it's still a lot to be sifted through, but clearly not great what you hear from the SEC commissioner there. So we'll continue to follow this and see where it goes. For more on this topic and really everything else happening around Georgia football, as I said, including some potential weirdness with UGA freshman offensive lineman Broderick Jones, let's do a lot of this now as a part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Let's bring on our buddy John Stinchcomb. And we'll get John here coming up in just a minute. His thoughts on everything associated with UGA football. A lot to cover in that. Jeff Zintel is telling us that Broderick Jones did suffer a bike incident. For those of you that follow Jones on social media, you see him riding the motorbikes and things like that. I'm guessing on the basis of what Jeff is telling me that is something that Jones has now dealt with, and kind of what does that mean for his status. And I guess more importantly, because I'm not going to speculate too much on injury status until we can say that for sure, and I would look at DawgNation.com throughout the day for more on that. But what does it mean for players being involved in those kinds of things? That's some of what I want to talk to John about. So let's do that and a whole lot more with John Stinchcomb as a part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, John Stinchcomb, always fun to talk to you here on a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Always appreciate your time and being with us. And, I said this before you joined us, John. The one thing that I'm not going to do is come on the show and talk about everything about the coronavirus stuff that makes me angry, because there's just too much that's already in the world. I'm also not going to spend the entire time hand-wringing on the possibility of will there be a season or not. When there's actual news, we got to talk about that and cover that, and we'll get to some of that here with you coming up in just a moment. But parallel to all of that, I still want to try to have some fun. Still want to try to, keep an upbeat tone about all of this and talk about some of the good stuff. We tried to do that, a little earlier with the George Pickens. I do think that's appropriate, and I'm sure you'll probably agree with me that you can't deny some of the stuff that's out there while simultaneously also trying to appreciate some of the other possibilities that could occur if we can just get players on the field this fall.
Yeah, I think it's needed. There's so much that can bring you down, get you fired up, and get your blood pressure out of whack right now, that sometimes what we need is just a way to get back to center and focus on some things that aren't so dramatic. And, sometimes it's just the basics that people want to talk about, want to hear about, because there's so much that feels dire in the world right now.
So let me start with where I was a moment ago on the show, and that's talking about George Pickens. And let me give you a little bit of backstory on some of the stuff I've said about Pickens over the years. I know that he shouldn't have gotten into a fight at the end of the Georgia Tech game, and whatever caused him to miss the first half of that game, that shouldn't have happened either. And it's obviously a disappointment when he misses the first half of the SEC championship game, and that's all real and has to be dealt with. And I would say the college maturity, growing in maturity is a part of the college experience for everyone, athletes and not. However, the one thing that I've always said, John, is that for a player that has competitive fire, Pickens clearly has it, I'd rather try to turn down the volume a little bit as opposed to try to take someone who maybe doesn't quite have that fire burning enough and trying to turn that volume up. I just think it's really, really easier to tone. I think it's much easier to try to tone down someone who runs in the red just a bit as opposed to getting someone to rev the engine a bit more if that's not their natural tendency. And we heard some audio from Kirby Smart describing how much George Pickens loves football. It was very, very similar to something that one of your former teammates, Sean Bailey, had also said as well, or I guess maybe a former teammate, maybe not. I guess maybe he just missed you at Georgia, but nonetheless, what Bailey said about how being at practice, you can see that Pickens loves football. John, I want players who love football, and if that love of football occasionally results in the play extending beyond the echo of the whistle, I can tolerate some of that because I need guys who love ball.
Yeah, and for anybody who's ever hired someone, you'd much rather lead with the bit than the whip, so to speak. You want a guy that, think, man, he's a go-getter. He loves what he's doing. He's passionate. Sometimes we probably need to reel him back in a little, but it's a heck of a lot better situation than someone who you're just trying to constantly cajole and get more from. Pickens is a guy who, obviously, from day one, you saw he's an elite talent. He's special. And you're just trying to minimize those occasions where that passion boils over. We saw it in Georgia Tech. We've seen the results of it from some suspensions, but I think everybody and their brother who's seen this guy on a football field says is when he's out there, he's one of the best on the field. He's one of the best 22 that's between the hash mark, so to speak. So, you root for him and you just want him to make the best choices because the sky is the limit for a guy like that. And, I agree with what Coach Smart says and your commentary on just players in general that, passion is a good thing. And when passion is paired with elite talent, there's opportunity for something that's really special. And I think that's what we're all hoping for Pickens, not selfishly solely as a dog fan, but for him on a personal level that, you see the potential he has and what could be in front of him, and you'd hate for anything to get in the way of that.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And the other thing that Smart spoke about on the ESPN podcast interview that he did, something else we've also addressed on this show, which is I've kind of made the Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen comparison of the most important thing for me for Georgia this year, because obviously opposing defenses are going to be spending a lot of practice time, a lot of skull session time, chalkboard time, talking about how you stop George Pickens. Therefore, the presence of Pickens has got to matter for the other receivers. Someone's got to flourish because of all the attention that Pickens is going to get. So ultimately, even though Pickens is one of my favorite offseason topics, the real story for the Georgia receiving corps this season, I think, really is more about who benefits from all the attention that Pickens is probably going to get from opposing defenses. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I like our options a lot better this year than what we had in the 2019 season. So it's just a matter of who that guy or a couple of guys is. Now, you almost felt bad for Swifty last year because defenses were challenging Georgia to utilize anyone other than him in an attack form, and I think that it helped with the emergence of Pickens. And nobody's keying in on even though he was highly touted, a rookie wide receiver that's somewhat unproven and early in the season was still trying to kind of take his shot and wasn't a mainstay and rep-wise on the field. So I think this year you just have to find more options, and in that wide receiver room alone, there seems to be a much better pool to pull from.
Yeah, I think that's true. Let me move on and talk about the coronavirus stuff for a moment, because before you joined us, we heard SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey from ESPN Radio over the weekend. It was like the most, I would say, disheartening words we've heard from him throughout this entire process. And, John, I don't mean to ask you a loaded question, but I want to give you the freedom to kind of take this where you want to go. Obviously it's one thing if everything is shut down. If there's no professional sports, if Major League Baseball, the NBA doesn't happen, if the NFL somehow, finds it can't happen, if colleges themselves aren't welcoming students this fall. If everything is shut down, it's sort of easy to understand why college football wouldn't take place, why the SEC wouldn't take place. But would be my question. If we're going to have NFL football on Sundays this fall, even if there's very limited fans, if we're going to have Major League Baseball, which is not going to be in a bubble, they're going to be traveling from city to city, if we're going to have the NBA, if colleges themselves, and right now the SEC's colleges are planning on doing that, even if the students themselves will be wearing masks, why wouldn't we have SEC football this fall if all these other things are going to be taking place?
I think we need to have some very frank conversation, and I think there's a difference between the ask of a professional athlete and the ask of a student athlete. I think there's probably more likelihood that there's professional sports than there is quote-unquote amateur sports, including college football, just because of the liability factor. I think there's responsibilities of these athletic departments to say, are we exposing or putting our student athletes in difficult positions to not make a choice or make a choice where they're feeling coerced into a difficult situation. Now, with that said, in most of the student athletes and young offensive linemen that I've trained, so I'm going to speak from that pool of people, you feel like you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof. So even if you were to contract it, there's not that fear of anything of significance happening other than they might get sick. And that's based on, one, probably the general mentality of it, and two, the statistics that say they're not in that target demographic where bad things happen to them. So, I think those frank conversations in college ranks need to occur because football is an in-your-face interaction. You're not going to be able to wear masks. You're not going to be able to socially distance. It won't matter after the game in the NFL if you trade jerseys or not because you've been sweating and breathing and hitting and laying on each other for 60 minutes,
Sure.
The absurdity of that, I think, was, pretty visible for all of us to see with the that we're going to keep players safe from that. Come on now. I mean, the exposure is going to be there, and it's that measured risk that you have to be willing to enter into to talk about having football this year. I mean, I've seen things where, we'll limit practices where, we won't play 11 on 11. And I just don't think that you can play the game of football and prepare to play the game of football in a meaningful way without recognizing you're going to have to break some of the recommended protocols that are in place to prevent COVID. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. And there's a lot of people that say that's a risk not worth taking, and there's a lot that say that it very much is. And, the powers that be are going to have to sit down and make those decisions.
I think it's really fair.
One more thing, B.A.
Please.
You look at, the Ivy League is a $30 million a year football season for them. And you think, well, they've already shut it down. But when you're talking about Power 5, big-time football, you're talking billions of dollars, $5 billion-ish a year in production. And without football being played, and it shouldn't be about money, but how many decisions ultimately are. Without football, I worry that there's so many programs across the country. We've seen Stanford take some steps in that direction where they've eliminated a number of their sports. But without that monetary production, these athletic departments across the country are going to have to make some very, very difficult decisions and trim back in some spaces just because the income's not there.
I think it's a really fair answer, John. I want to follow up on that in a moment. Let me first remind folks, this is our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with John Stinchcomb. If you go to marlowstavern.com, you're going to find out that the tavern in your neighborhood is open. That means if you want to go enjoy that chef-inspired food, that house-made magic that has made Marlowe's famous, you can do that inside a tavern dining room right now. A lot of folks are still doing a lot of to-go food. In fact, a lot of folks have kind of found out that Marlowe's Tavern to-go is really pretty good, and so a lot of you are still doing that. Well, marlowstavern.com. You can get the phone number for the tavern in your neighborhood. You can call, get that order. When I was doing Marlowe's to-go, one of the things I've always been kind of amazed by is just how efficient that process is, how clean it all is, how much peace of mind you get when you pick that food up, knowing that it's been well prepared, of course, but also well taken care of, to limit, any kind of extra contact or anything like that you might need with your food. It's one of the reasons why we love Marlowe's Tavern here so much. New summer menu in place, really delicious food items, taking great care to make sure everything tastes the way that it's supposed to, special, magical, and craft cocktails very much the same way, but also taking good care of you and your family here during this challenging time. Our friends at Marlowe's Tavern have done a great job with that, so you can find them online at marlowstavern.com. All right, John, let me get back to the topic at hand for a moment, because I think everything you just said there was very reasoned and logical. I would expect nothing less from you. Should it matter, and maybe it doesn't, but should it matter that every measurement that we have of players' feelings on this indicates that by a wide majority, players want to play? ESPN survey, the Athletic survey, for instance, have indicated that players themselves want to be out there and playing. Yes, there's a risk associated with this, and yes, young people may be a little bit, more likely to believe in their own invincibility more so than someone my age or maybe someone a little bit older than me. But the fact that the players want to play, should that have any factor in whether or not we will actually play?
I think it should absolutely factor in to a degree. I think that's one of the metrics that you take into consideration. At the end of the day, you also have to look at who's going to be holding the bag. We don't want to see anyone suffer from COVID. And if there was exposure and you have an increase in cases, there's probably an increase in opportunity for that one player for things to not go as planned, and that's a scary proposition. And sadly, we live in a world where we feel like someone is always to blame, and I think there's a number of decision makers that are worried about that very scenario and saying, what happens when we get sued, and what happens? What's our liability? What's our exposure? When an upset mom and dad have dealt with either a very adverse reaction or catastrophic reaction to a COVID case, and they're saying that it's due to exposure, undue, unneeded, unnecessary exposure from playing the game, even if that player was one that said, I want to play. I think the Malcolm Jenkins comments on the issue when he said football is non-essential. And, it comes a little different from a guy who's had the opportunity to play in a couple different Super Bowls and win some, and he's got a great career. And that perspective may be a little different than, a 19-year-old who's going, man, I want to play. I haven't had the same opportunities that you've had, but I think there's wisdom in that approach as well. So again, these are difficult decisions that are going to be made, and you're never ever going to please everyone. There's plenty of folks, and I'm one of them, that would love to see football played. But those that are making the decisions have to make sure that you're not asking young student athletes to, make that decision or commit to something that puts them at a greater risk, even if they would be willing to do so. I think, it's almost that dad mentality that, you protect your kids even when they say they want something, and you might have to make some difficult choices. It's tough. It's a really tough deal.
I've kept you long, and I apologize. I do want to squeeze in one more topic before we let you go. Our Jeff Sintel from DawgNation is telling us that Georgia freshman offensive lineman Broderick Jones was involved in a bike accident. If you've ever followed Jones on social media, he's into motorbikes, ATVs, things like that. Apparently, he's sustained an injury because of an accident there. Now, John, I'm not going to speculate on his status. Obviously, any kind of injury would be, a setback for his freshman season. I think there's a really good chance this is not anything that's going to, be super serious necessarily. I'm going to wait and let Jeff Sintel report on that at DawgNation.com. So let me sidestep the how long he's going to be out portion of this, because I don't think either one of us would probably say that we know that. We're not physicians. But I am curious, this is not the first time that Georgia has dealt with something like this. There's, fish hook Jake Fromm's hand. There's Sony Michel ATV accident going back to 2016. When you talking about 20-something-year-old guys, you're going to be talking about some pretty crazy off-season behavior. I'm for some reason I'm thinking about Aaron Murray jumping off into Lake Burton or something like that. These things kind of just sort of pop up over the years. What's your feeling on that as an elder statesman now? You're, a few years removed from your own college experience. How much bubble wrap should we wrap these guys in, or should we let them live their life?
Well, you know what? You're only in college once, and you're only that age once where your body will allow you to do some things that, as you and I can probably attest, we probably can't do the same things that I was able to do when I was 20 years old. Maybe it's just me. But you just want them to make good choices, and you hope that they're safe when doing it, but you want them to live and have those great experiences as well. So as much as you'd love for them to stay in the weight room, the cafeteria in their dorm room, or the study hall at all times, I think you also can see a need for them to have that full experience in life that extends off the football field. So it's the balance. You're always hoping that your players can recognize the balance of having those cool experiences, getting those opportunities and taking advantage of them, but doing so in a way that doesn't put them at extraneous risk that they have no business being a part of. And there's some unfortunate accidents that have occurred in the past. A former wide receiver who we all love dearly had a pretty significant ATV accident, and it kind of changed the trajectory for him in significant ways. So you don't want that for anyone, but you also don't want, for me, I don't want them to miss out on some pretty cool experiences. You just want them to do it in a way that, go out there, have fun, but don't do anything stupid. Don't take those risks to the extreme, and put more on yourself. There's just too much at stake.
John, I think that's all well said, and I always appreciate being a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. It's great to get your thoughts on a wide-ranging number of topics, hopefully, as we get towards the fall. More of this will be good news than not. I can't guarantee that'll be the case, but no matter where the news takes us, I'm appreciative of your perspective on it. Thanks for being here, and we'll look forward to getting a chance to talk to you soon.
I always enjoy it, B.A. Go Dog.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So if you're just joining us, what I was talking to John about is Jeff Sintel telling us before the show begins today, and they'll be reporting coming up at DawgNation.com, that Broderick Jones has sustained some kind of injury because of a bike accident. That's what Jeff has let us be known, and I wanted to talk to John Stinchcomb about that right there. The severity of it's not known. That's what we're waiting for more, or at least I don't know it. That's what we're waiting for more reporting on, but I did think it was interesting to get John's perspective on how we feel about young players doing these kinds of young guy things. And I have kind of a lot to say about this. I think this is one of those things that will kind of come out more throughout the week as we learn more about this necessarily. But let me just kind of spitball a couple of things here for a moment. I don't know if this is true, but I've heard this is true. That, how we've occasionally heard about athletes getting hurt while playing pickup basketball? One of the things I heard one time is in some NBA contracts, there was a provision that protected players were they to get injured in a pickup game. It's called a love of the game clause, that you can't expect basketball players not to play basketball during their free time. And, there are certain injuries that might potentially void a contract or, put a contract in jeopardy, that some NBA players apparently had a clause in their contract of, hey, if I'm, at run and shoot or, some outdoor court somewhere playing pickup basketball with my friends, if I get hurt, don't come after my money. That's a love of the game clause. I'm protected on that. I don't know if that's true. I haven't read NBA contracts. I've just heard that that's that's true. But the spirit of that, I do think should sort of exist in life as well. Not a love of the game clause in this case necessarily, but sort of a love of life clause. I've been pretty consistent on all of this, whether it be Sony Michel in 2016, Jake Fromm and some of the outdoor activities that kind of seemed to cause him some trouble. It wasn't just fish hook. At one point in time, the water skiing thing hit him in the hand. And now, whatever may have happened with incoming freshman offensive lineman Broderick Jones, I am kind of weirdly okay with players living their life. And I say this as someone who says, man, Broderick Jones has a chance to be one of the best freshman offensive linemen, Georgia's had in recent years, a potential contender for a starting spot. I believe that's a real strong possibility for him. But I'm not going to tell Broderick Jones that he can't live his life, nor would I have told Sony Michel that a couple of years ago, nor would I have told Jake Fromm that there as well. I am okay with them living their life. Now, when it comes to some of these sort of motorized things, there's kind of a cottage industry in the Atlanta area, some of these Twitter accounts that'll show videos of burnouts and street racing and things like that. Some of it happens on, say, 285 or I-20 or something like that, late at night. As a father who will one day have, teenage children, a boy and a girl, my rule and stuff like that is, well, I wouldn't want you doing something like that because that's illegal, right? Street racing is illegal. My thing with my own kids would be, go out and live your life, enjoy your life, do whatever, but I'm going to draw the line at things that are illegal. Some things are illegal entire category. Some things are restricted by age. Some things are, restricted by, whatever else. So, the love of life for me would end at the moment in which it becomes an infraction of the law. But, ATVs in and of themselves, motorbikes in and of themselves, or anything along those lines, water skiing, fishing, things like that, those are sort of normal activities that do involve some element of risk. So I'm not going to tell any Georgia player that they can't do those kinds of things, and I'm going to assume that in any given year, when we're talking about 85 young, very, very energetic, young men in the ages of sort of 18 to 21 or however old these guys are, spring and summer is going to kind of bring with it some occasional bumps and bruises, and you just sort of hope for the best, and kind of hope it all works out. But I jokingly, mentioned to John Stinchcomb before about wrapping these guys in bubble wrap. You obviously cannot do that, nor for the most part am I going to try. Now, my SEC through music's going to run out here in a moment. So let me deal with a couple of stories that are out there. I mentioned this earlier about what Sports Illustrated reported last week, going into today. In Birmingham, the expectation the SEC athletic directors will meet in person. I don't know what's going to come out of this. I've kind of talked about before about will we get more leaks coming out of this, indications of which direction the SEC is leaning, outright announcements. I'm not quite so sure. There were a couple of things that John Stinchcomb said a moment ago that really stuck with me. John mentioned the idea of liability, programs being responsible for the players while they're on campus. I thought that's one of the reasons why I thought a lot of what Jim Harbaugh said last week, maybe not every single word, maybe not all perfectly phrased, but for the most part, I thought that Jim Harbaugh's statement last week was a welcome, comment into this overall discussion where Harbaugh said, I want the responsibility. I'm volunteering for the responsibility of taking care of these players. And yet, John, a little bit different tact on that topic when he joined us a moment ago, discussing that the challenge that college football faces in comparison to professional sports, which for now appear to be taking place, college students returning on campus, which for now appears to be going to take place, is that there's a level of liability that college football programs may take for their players that the administrators, whether it be at the conference level, the school president level, athletic director level, or just head coach level, a level of liability on all of this. They're just not all that comfortable with it. It's one of the reasons why we see these programs shutting down seemingly every time that there's a small handful of positive tests that come out. And I've said this before on the show. The one thing I have enough respect to understand is that when you're in the position of having to make the decision, and people will blame you if it goes wrong, your view of liability is just a little bit different. You're going to see things in kind of a more high-stakes scenario. It's easy for someone to Monday morning quarterback this and say, well, they just need to get out there and play football. It's easy to say that when you're not the one who's going to be held to account if all of this does not go well. To say nothing of the fact that these administrators, coach, everything else, they truly deeply care about their players, and I believe that to be true. However, the other thing that you can't really avoid with all this is that we're never going to get past the liability. If this is one of those things of you have to be responsible and you have to be scared every time someone tests positive, that we're never getting past this, because this is a real disease. It has a real infection rate. We can measure that across the country. You're not going to test, a couple of hundred student athletes and have none of them come back with positive tests. If you do, you're not sticking the swab in far enough. This is definitely going to result in some positive tests. And if the presence of positive tests alone are enough to shut down the season, then we're not going to have a season, right? So, that's just the reality of all of this. And while I may have one opinion on this, I do have respect for the people who run this deal, whether it be athletic directors, coaches, whatever else, to understand that their responsibilities, related to this are obviously much greater than mine is. I guess one more point on this, it's been kind of interesting to see all of the speculation that kind of pops up of, well, we know the Big Ten is not going to play conference-only games. We know the Pac-12 has followed suit on that, and for now, they've canceled their non-conference games as well, and gosh knows they may cancel the whole season any minute now. But for now, they've at least canceled their non-conference games, and that leaves the SEC fan wondering, well, what would things look like if my conference only played conference-only games? It's been kind of interesting to see some of the people online that say, well, based on this, that, and the other, here are the extra SEC games Georgia could play, and then maybe it's, extended playoff as a way of deciding who makes, who should the national championship be if you're only playing your conference foes, or is there a way that Georgia can still play Georgia Tech, or maybe, there's, you're adding some of these SEC West teams that you're not scheduled to play for a little while, and all of a sudden you see a list of games and you're thinking, well, it looks pretty interesting, actually. If it actually worked out that way, maybe that's a better, more fun schedule than the one that Georgia was initially slated to play. And I'm glad that people can still sort of look around, kind of find that way, to have that level of fun and enjoy that. And this is listen, we've never had quite an off season like this, I don't think, in college football's history, certainly not in the time you and I have been sitting here and talking about all this kind of stuff. And the only thing we can do is just sort of wait and see what happens next. The next big event are these SEC athletic directors getting together, reportedly anyway, in Birmingham, and we will find out what they all have to say at the moment they're ready to tell us about it. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, in the little bit of time we have left, I want to kind of touch on a couple of recruiting nuggets for a moment, no pun intended. Nugget Warren did drop his top 7 yesterday. It did include UGA. There you see on video, you see the rest of these for Dejon Warren. You got Oklahoma there, you got Tennessee, Alabama, Florida State, Georgia, Maryland, and Penn State. I guess the internet says that Georgia's chief competition on this may be Penn State. That's some of the stuff that you're kind of hearing on that for Nugget Warren. This is one of those guys that, boy, it seems to be a lot to like about his game. Seems to be some fun stuff about him. Georgia obviously looking to stack that defensive back category with every single one of these recruiting classes. And this is a guy that Jeff Sintel's been telling us about now for a while. Warren seems to be getting a little closer in his process, but that's the, that's a guy that that Jeff's been telling us about for a while. One more thing I'll briefly mention here. There was also potentially a false start in recruiting yesterday for maybe a potential announcement. I'm not going to say much more about that because I don't want to spoil the kid's moment, but sometimes the timing of all this kind of stuff can be a little tricky. But certainly there are plenty of people who had their ear to the ground yesterday who maybe found out that maybe Georgia could be close to adding another commitment here pretty soon. But that's not my news to break, so I won't say much about that right now. When the young man's ready to go public with that, we will certainly let him do that and get ready to say goodbye to you here on DawgNation Daily today. Let me mention this also on the way out the door here, something very, very different. We don't usually talk about entertainment stuff around here, but so Saturday morning I woke up early and I watched the movie For the Love of the Game. That's the baseball movie with Kevin Costner. It's always been a little bit of a controversial movie with a lot of guys because a lot of guys will tell you that you're tricked into thinking that's a sports movie when it's actually a romantic comedy. Be that as it may, I've always loved the movie. Vin Scully's play-by-play of the perfect game is really one of the most fun things I've ever seen really in a movie. I just loved it. So I'm watching the movie, and I did not realize that Kelly Preston was even ill, sick, breast cancer. Come to find out she's passed away. It's so ironic that she passed away here over this weekend. I was just watching For the Love of the Game on Saturday. I didn't know that she was even sick. So we don't do a lot of celebrity stuff around here, but certainly condolences to her family. I still love that movie after all these years. Something else that I love, Gator Hater Updater. How about this? It's been 1,353 days. 1,353 since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten Georgia. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. I would advise you that you get that air conditioning tuned back up to factory fresh specs. What R.S. Andrews can do for you. make sure long summer to come. Really, the hottest weather is still yet to come. So make sure your system is ready to go. Get it to Factory Fresh Spec with our friends at RS Andrews. Find them online at rsandrews.com. All right, I have no comments pulled up. Let me do this. Let me go to YouTube first today. We'll see what they're arguing about, and then we'll meander over to Facebook after that. And we got about, let's try to do about 10 minutes here. Keep it to 10, and we'll see if we can get off the air after that. Killamime says, yeah, Kelly Preston did pass away. Very, very sad. She's also in Jerry Maguire, a movie I really like there as well. Like I said, we don't typically do celebrity, Hollywood news, but it was just so ironic. I was watching the Costner movie for Love of the Game, what a lot of guys don't like because they say it's a romantic comedy. But I was watching that on Saturday morning, early in the morning, just thinking about, boy, I still really like this movie a lot. And then lo and behold, she passed away. Connor Raleigh joins us, by the way.
Is Jerry Maguire another sports movie that's really a romantic comedy?
I think a lot of people would say that because it's got some of the same trappings of almost being that. But Preston, as it turns out, good in both. Also, Cameron Crowe, the great director of Jerry Maguire, just celebrated the anniversary of Almost Famous. Another one of my personal faves, but we'll leave that out. Scott Harris says, what about bowl games, BA? That's a non-conference game. Do they plan on playing them? Here's the problem you have with this. And I talked to you on Friday's show about how I believe that what the Big Ten chose to do was mostly about money. It gets treated as, something different than that. But it's, I'm being very careful not to say a lot, beyond just facts and some of this kind of stuff. But I believe a lot of what the Big Ten did was they canceled a lot of expensive non-conference games. They didn't want to play them. But here's the thing that you run the risk of. Let's say the SEC was really adamant about playing, other conferences were not. At a certain point in time, that puts the bowl situation in jeopardy because you have not enough of these teams playing games, right? So I would say that the absence of bowl money, if a lot more teams are going to find it just improper to play, impossible to play, the absence of that bowl money could play a factor in some of this kind of stuff that we could see great. I'm speculating here, but this is very sensible speculation that if a lot of teams aren't playing, a lot of conferences aren't playing, remember, because a lot of the bowls that take place are not between the SEC and the ACC and the SEC and the Big Ten. A lot of these are conferences that are a lot farther down the trough. We could see a greatly reduced bowl schedule this year just by virtue of the fact there are not enough teams to fill those bowls. Tristan West coming in hot. That's pretty impressive. Frank Patterson says, see, yeah, for whatever reason, these are some of the teams that I've seen. He says, my vote is you play at Ole Miss, and then you have a night game at home versus LSU. See, that's some of what I've seen. I don't really quite know how people are getting there, but I've definitely seen people online that are – I'm always amazed at how people are certain about things that are not true. Like right now, there is no alternate SEC schedule, but if it was, there are a lot of people who think that Georgia's two opponents would be Ole Miss and LSU. It's not my place to say they're not right, and I'm telling you right now, if I could drop Tech and Virginia and add Ole Miss and LSU, that is just a better schedule. It just is. I would absolutely take that, even though, at least in the case of LSU, it's a more challenging opponent. But I'm always amazed at how there seems to be sometimes agreement in the rumor mill for something that can't be verified. Noah Sheldon says last time LSU came to Athens, they lost. They lost in 2013. That's true. Is that the last time? For some reason, I always remember the game in which Georgia got hosed by the officials on the A.J. Green touchdown. I guess that would have been the year. What year would that have been? Well, it's A.J. Green's have been well before 2013. But 09 maybe? Was that 09? Oh, yeah, 09. Boy, when you get old, man, all these games and years just start running together. What a disaster. That was one of the angriest moments I've had in Sanford Stadium, though. One of the angriest moments. Scott Harris says, without non-conference games, Florida may not get to 6 wins. See, that's the kind of stuff I'm here for right there. That's what I'm here for. Let's go over to and find out what people are doing over there. Hope all of you are staying healthy. I will tell you we do have vacation next week. We're going to pre-record some shows. Still kind of getting all those details together, but we will be doing some pre-recorded shows here for next week. And looking forward to that. Matt Rukavina, thank you so much for the 2009. Jeff Seal says there was an article on DawgNation on Friday that had Georgia at home versus Arkansas and on the road at Mississippi State. Well, there you go. guess those are different games, but I guess there's no monopoly on speculation when it comes to stuff like that at the moment. Curtis Strickland checking in. Thank you, Curtis. Philip Jordan Wells, good to see you as always. John Paul Williams says, I think we still see a college football season. I'm no expert, but from what the experts are saying, yeah, listen. At this point in time, I don't know. Lynn Johnson Shipman says, I guess what I'm saying is I'm not getting at what the experts are saying right now. That's where we seem to get ourselves in some trouble sometimes. So anything that starts with the experts say, ... that's where we sort of get ourselves in some trouble. So that's what I'm going to leave. I'm gonna let that belong to somebody else for a moment. Yeah, Lynn Johnson Shipman said that Mike Griffith was saying it'd be Arkansas, Mississippi State. Maybe so. Myra Herbert Bush brings up a good point. That wanted to mark off or still wants to mark off Missouri in terms of a road trip. So I've talked to some other guys, and the one thing because I've never been to the Missouri game either. But the one thing that I've heard is it's actually a really fun trip. And there's a lot of different ways you can go. You can go through Kansas City. You can go through St. Louis. You can do a lot of different things around that. But I've actually heard that the Missouri trip is kind of underrated depending on kind of how you go about it. So there you go. Matt Rugavina says, let's just play SEC, ACC, Big 12. Just play a regular season. Keep it out of the Pac-12 and the Big 10. Would probably make for a more fun season anyway. Let them have the Rose Bowl. I totally agree with this. One of the things you hear some people say is, well, there's just not enough, central control of college football. Listen, how many things in life are made better by more central control? I mean, let's just, answer that question, first and foremost. Like, I don't need a commissioner of college football unless that commissioner is going to find a way to play. The last thing I want is to empower someone to be a commissioner and have the first act of the commissioner be to cancel everything. That's not what I want. And I, generally speaking, agree with Matt on this, that the autonomy that conferences like the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 12 still have, I think ought to be used as a way of figuring all this kind of stuff out because, regardless of whatever the circumstances and the situation is related to the virus, it's easier to figure it out with a smaller number of entities than it is with a larger number. Think about this if you've ever gone to dinner with your friend. You and 3 friends can figure out which restaurant to go to. You and 12 friends, not always so easy. So it's the same thing here. As long as we're talking about a conference in the SEC's case, or maybe a couple of conferences, because I think the SEC would like for the ACC to also play, because you can play those cross-division rivalry games, or I should say those inter-conference rivalry games. As long as that's what's going on here, it's just easier to figure that out. The fact that the Pac-12 and the Big Ten to a degree are willing to stand down, the fact that a lot of these Group of 5 schools that seemingly can't afford to do testing and stuff anyway. Them kind of stepping aside ought to make it easier to get on the field. But admittedly, there's still a lot to deal with and still a lot to cover when it comes to stuff like that. Jan Armistead having rotator cuff surgery tomorrow. Jan, prayers for you. That does not sound fun. Daniel Aldrich, good to see you. Yeah, that rotator cuff stuff can be. Megan Beard and Womack says my skepticism is making me nervous. I'm not trying to be too skeptical. I feel like I've been pretty good today. I'm trying to have fun, trying to do whatever. Somebody asked me if I missed the beard. No, I really don't miss the beard. When I'm so fat, I feel like I probably looked better with the beard. I think that generally speaking, a beard probably works better for fat faces, but for the most part, I have not really missed the beard. It's been pretty okay without that. Jeff Edmondson says not to get into politics or conspiracy theories. ... Yeah, that's where I got to let you go. You guys are welcome to talk about whatever you want, but in terms of what we're going to talk about, me to you, there's just already so much of that, right? There are so many places that you can go to hear what the real story around the coronavirus is. And by the way, that depends on whatever your definition of the real story is. Our official position around here is we want there to be a football season. We're not pretending to be anything other than that, and we are very respectful of all the challenges associated with dealing with a global pandemic. Brian Whitehead says that the beard being shaved coincides with the reemergence of hotspots around the country for the virus. Tough to think about that. I was worried about my face getting two-toned in the summertime, trying to be outside. Maybe so. Maybe so. Michael Webb, funny line. Randy Hall on the subject of Brock Bowers. Yeah, I guess there's some chatter out there about Bowers. And, yeah, I mean, first of all, it's cool to think about how much he likes Georgia, potentially, as the internet will tell you, paying his own way to come down to Athens and seeing all of that. And that's pretty cool. Daniel Aldrich says we're all fat now. Yeah, listen, if you go back and look at shows from, you won't do this, but you could do this. Go back and look at the at DawgNation Daily on video, the Friday before the SEC championship. Look how skinny I was then compared to how fat I am now. Now I'm not telling you I was, a golden Adonis in December, but you compare the December version of BA to the unfortunate July version. Oh, it's gross. It's gross. Craig Hill says, stick to football. Yes, we need our football and nothing else. That's one thing I've learned. This is my job, right? And the same way that, if I was a restaurant owner and if, you came in to sit down and order food and I walked over and said, hey, let me tell you what's really going on with this coronavirus. Obviously a restaurant owner wouldn't do that. Some of them do, but shouldn't. But the same way I wouldn't do that if you came and sat down in my restaurant, I'm not going to do that when you come and sit down and participate in my college football show. I'm just not going to do that. I've always been really proud of the fact that, Georgia's a big state. We have a lot of different parts of the state. And I would say that for the most part, our show plays pretty well in all of those various areas. We've drawn pretty big crowds in, in-town locations, out, remote parts of the state. And that's it. Jermaine King says, I'm all muscle now. Maybe that's the case. Randy Hall compares me to John Cena. Boy, I don't know about that, although I would take that as a compliment. I would certainly take that as a compliment. Rick Joyner, happy birthday. Yeah, he says he wants the dogs to play as a birthday gift. Oh, boy, I know where you're coming from on that. I definitely do. Graham Nicholson says, when's Mike Griffith going to have a regular schedule? That's a good question. I'm not sure that. I'm not really quite sure what his regular schedule is. Little Ricky says, I look a lot younger without the beard. So my boss actually told me that the other day, too. So maybe I got to, first of all, I need to look as young as I possibly can. So maybe I do look younger without the beard. So I'll take that as a compliment, I guess. Frank Patterson says, wonder what Jeff heard about Brock Bowers' supposed visit to Athens this weekend. I'm sure we'll be hearing from Jeff on that. I'm sure we would be. Alexander Williams says Missouri games are a lot of fun, a way better Columbia to travel to. See, I mean, I know this is not a popular thing to say, but I actually kind of like going to Columbia, South Carolina. It's a close trip. I've never really minded that trip to Columbia, South Carolina. I will tell you one of the things I want to do, and this is kind of a sort of a, some of y'all will roll your eyes when I say this. So there's a place in Missouri I really want to go to, and come to find out it's closer to Fayetteville, Arkansas than it is to Columbia, Missouri. I want to go to Big Cedar Lodge. This is not a commercial, but I've always thought Big Cedar Lodge would be a kind of a cool place to go. And it's actually pretty close to Fayetteville, much closer to Fayetteville than it is to Columbia. So maybe the next time Georgia plays at Arkansas, which I think it's supposed to be next year, maybe we'll find a way to do a DawgNation invasion to Big Cedar Lodge or something like that. Courtney Fisher, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. John English says, no one wants to divide their customers by veering off subject except when dissing the Gators. That's true. If you really, watch the show on a regular basis, the way we treat Florida is the way that, for the most part, so-and-so political person treats opposite political party. And that's kind of on purpose. It's sort of part of the joke, I guess, is that, most really good, broadcasts find a way to make someone the other, and our other is Florida around here because we think that's a pretty safe enemy to have because it's not quite as serious as some of the other stuff in the world. But John's exactly right on that. Exactly right. Frank Patterson says the South Carolina Stadium is way louder than Missouri Stadium, way better football environment. He says, I hate their 2001 sandstorm traditions, but they are pretty good. Yeah, I know it's kind of weird to give a compliment to a somewhat Georgia rival, but I always have felt like the in-stadium atmosphere at South Carolina was pretty impressive. Graham Nicholson also mentioned the possibility of a rendezvous barbecue there in Memphis. That's never a bad idea. Never a bad idea. Kyle Fold says he's actually lost weight during the Rona. That's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. All right, we got to get ready. Anything else we want to talk about? Keith Folds calls it Bryce Ramsey Stadium. That's pretty funny. Joel Moody mentions Great Wolf Lodge. That's a nice one to know about. Thank you. Myra Herbert Bush's husband went to Missouri. That's kind of cool. One of my good friends, we always talk about Marlowe's Tavern. One of my good friends at Marlowe's is a Missouri gal as well, so she's a big Mizzou fan. Let's see what else. Yeah, Michael Webb, you're kind of on the same page as me on that for sure. Philip Jordan Wells, funny stuff as always. All right, let's see. Anything else before we go? Gerald Harmon bringing up Jada Pinkett Smith. Boy, I don't know if I'm ready to wade in those waters yet, but I've kind of followed that a little bit. I know about half that story, to be honest with you, Gerald. I know about half that story. Maybe one of these days we'll put like a separate feed up where we talk about some of that other kind of stuff for sure. But I did see some of that with Jada and Will. You hate to see it, I guess, is the overall takeaway from that. You hate to see it for sure. All right, we got to get ready to go. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Your water heater goes out. In many cases, they can replace it for you the same day. But you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Also, some fun stuff at ajc.com today for your Atlanta News Now. So, the Braves are going to scrimmage tonight, and it's going to be on television. So this is kind of a big deal. You can find out more details on that at ajc.com. There was some inter-squad stuff last week, more of that starting right now, and tonight it's actually going to be televised, so you can read about all that kind of stuff. Also, some drive-in movie stuff. That's been kind of a fun thing to do during the coronavirus lockdown. AJC.com's got you some stuff on that. And we did have Atlanta sports return this weekend, at least in some form or fashion, with the Atlanta United. So you can read more about that, ajc.com there as well. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Big thanks to you for getting your UGA news right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. Y'all have a great day. I look forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.